Dark clouds loomed over the empty road, rain pounding the earth like relentless fists. In the middle of the muddy path, 3 tiny golden retriever puppies lay helplessly, their frail bodies soaked, shivering from the cold. One barely moved, eyes half closed, while the other 2 curled around it, clinging to the last bit of warmth they could find. Lightning flashed, revealing their matted fur stained with dirt and blood. They had been abandoned, left to perish in the storm. But fate had other plans. What happened next would change everything. The storm raged violently, relentless and unforgiving. Wind howled through the vast emptiness of the countryside, bending tree branches as though they were mere twigs. Rain came down in sheets, heavy and unrelenting, drenching the cracked asphalt road that stretched through the darkness like a forgotten scar. Puddles formed in uneven patches, reflecting the eerie flashes of lightning that tore through the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape for mere moments before plunging it back into suffocating blackness. In the middle of this merciless downpour, 3 tiny figures huddled together, barely visible against the waterlogged ground. They were golden retriever puppies, no more than 6 weeks old, abandoned in the storm like discarded trash. Their once golden fur was now darkened by mud, matted in tangled clumps. Their tiny ribs showed beneath their soaked coats, their frail bodies shivering uncontrollably. Their paws, too small to grip the slippery ground, trembled as they curled into each other, instinctively seeking warmth that no longer remained. One of them, the weakest, lay nearly motionless, its head resting against the cold, unforgiving earth. Its breaths came in slow, labored gasps, barely stirring the air. Its eyes, barely open, were unfocused and glassy, the fire of survival flickering faintly within them. The other 2, slightly stronger, pressed their small bodies against it, whimpering softly, as though urging their sibling to fight, to hold on just a little longer. Another flash of lightning split the sky, revealing the hopeless sight. For a brief moment, the entire world was bathed in a stark, unnatural glow, 3 tiny, shivering souls in the middle of an abandoned road, left to perish under the wrath of nature. The rain pounded harder, drumming against the ground in deafening rhythm, pooling in the cracks and dips of the road, seeping into the fur of the helpless puppies. The smallest of the 3 let out a weak, pitiful whimper, barely more than a whisper against the roaring wind. Its tiny body twitched, but then fell still again. The 2 stronger pups, desperate and terrified, attempted to move closer, nudging their sibling with wet noses. Their small tails, caked in mud, flicked feebly. But exhaustion weighed down on them, their tiny muscles stiff from cold and fear. They had no strength left to cry, no energy to run, no shelter to seek. Their stomachs growled painfully, empty for too long. Hunger had long since dulled into a numb ache, overtaken by the biting chill that seeped into their bones. Their tiny bodies had been strong once, full of boundless puppy energy, chasing after each other, playfully tumbling over their mother's paws. But that was before. Before they were ripped away from warmth and comfort. Before they were dumped in the middle of nowhere, left at the mercy of the storm. Did their mother search for them now? Did she wonder where her babies had gone? Or had she too been discarded, forgotten just as cruelly? Thunder cracked overhead, louder than before, shaking the very ground beneath them. The smallest pup flinched, but didn't lift its head. Its breathing had slowed further, barely perceptible now. The other 2 pressed against it, their small eyes darting around as if searching for help that would never come. The minutes stretched endlessly. The storm showed no mercy. The rain blurred the edges of the world, turning everything into a grey, endless void. Then, suddenly, a distant sound. It was different from the thunder, different from the wind's mournful wails. It was low and steady, a deep, rumbling noise growing closer with every second. The puppy's ears twitched at the unfamiliar vibration through the ground. The stronger of the 2 lifted its head slightly, struggling to focus through the rain. The sound grew louder, closer, a mechanical growl, cutting through the storm's relentless rage. A light appeared in the distance. Two bright, glowing beams pierced the darkness, bouncing over the uneven road, slicing through the sheets of rain. The rumbling intensified, vibrating against the ground. And then a monstrous shape emerged from the storm. A red truck, large and heavy, roared forward, its headlights illuminating the broken road ahead. The windshield wipers worked furiously, trying to clear the torrential downpour from the glass. The massive vehicle moved steadily, its tires slicing through the flooded path, cutting through the night like a lifeline in an endless void. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly. His face was shadowed by the dim light inside the cab, but his expression was one of quiet weariness. His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, but something, a fleeting, gut-wrenching feeling, stirred inside him as his headlights cast long, stretching shadows over the wet pavement. Something was there, something small, something alive. His foot moved to the brake. Nathan Carter slammed his foot against the brake pedal, his truck skidding slightly on the rain-slicked road before coming to a halt. The engine hummed, a steady contrast to the howling wind outside. His tired, calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening for a moment as his eyes adjusted to the scene before him. His headlights cut through the storm, illuminating three small, trembling figures curled up in the mud. His breath hitched in his throat. Puppies. Nathan exhaled sharply, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. He'd seen plenty of awful things during his time as a cop, crime scenes that haunted his sleep, broken people with nowhere to turn. But this was a different kind of cruelty. Someone had abandoned them here, left them in the middle of the storm to suffer a slow, inevitable death. He shoved the truck into park and pushed the door open, stepping out into the raging storm. The cold was immediate, biting through his jacket as rain pelted his face, soaking him within seconds. He barely noticed. His focus was locked on the fragile creatures ahead of him. Nathan Carter was a man worn down by grief, his body still strong, but slower, heavier than it had been in his younger days. In his late 40s, he carried himself with the weight of someone who had lived too long with ghosts. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, his dark hair peppered with grey, unkempt from months of not caring. A short beard framed his face, rough against his weathered skin, and his deep-set blue eyes, once sharp and unwavering, now held a tiredness that never seemed to fade. For years, Nathan had kept himself isolated from the world, driving his long-haul routes in silence, burying himself in work to avoid the past that clawed at him. He had stopped believing in second chances, in fate, in anything that could not be proven by cold, hard facts. But as he stared at the three tiny figures in front of him, something in his chest twisted. The puppies did not react to his presence at first. They were too weak, too cold. Their small bodies trembled, their fur so soaked with rain and filth that their golden coats had turned a dark, muddy brown. Nathan crouched down, his large hands reaching out carefully. The largest of the three, a slightly bigger pup with a stronger build, tried to shift its weight, lifting its head just enough to look at him with wary, exhausted eyes. The second, a smaller but equally fragile pup, whined softly but did not move. The third, the weakest, was barely breathing. Its tiny ribs rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps. Nathan cursed under his breath. They wouldn't survive much longer out here. He moved quickly, scooping up the smallest one first. It was ice-cold against his palms, barely reacting to his touch. He wrapped it against his chest, shielding it from the wind as he reached for the other two. The stronger one resisted slightly, its muscles stiff with fear, but it was too weak to put up much of a fight. The last one simply let itself be lifted, its small head lolling against his arm. With the puppies secure in his grasp, Nathan hurried back to the truck, his boots splashing through puddles as the rain continued to hammer down. He climbed inside, slamming the door shut against the storm. The sound of heavy raindrops against metal filled the cabin, but inside It was at least warm. Nathan set the puppies carefully on the passenger seat, grabbing an old flannel shirt from the back and wrapping them in it. His fingers, rough from years of work and disuse, brushed against their wet fur, feeling the frailness of their tiny bodies. He turned the heater up, letting the warm air blow over them as he sat back, staring at them for a long moment. He hadn't planned on this. Hell, he hadn't planned on anything for a long time. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling. "Guess I can't leave you out there." His voice was rough, unused to conversation. The puppies did not respond, but the strongest one gave a tiny twitch of its ear, as if it had heard him. Nathan put the truck into drive and pulled back onto the road, heading toward home. His house was as empty as he was, a small, weathered cabin at the edge of town, tucked away from the main roads, buried deep in solitude. It had once been filled with warmth, laughter, soft voices, the scent of home-cooked meals. Now it was nothing more than a shelter, a place where memories lingered like ghosts in the walls. Nathan pushed open the front door, stepping inside with the puppies cradled in his arms. The cabin smelled of old wood and faded coffee, of a life once lived but long since abandoned. He flicked on the lights, revealing a modest living room, worn furniture, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in months, shelves lined with books he no longer read. He carried the puppies to the couch, setting them down carefully. They were still soaked, their small bodies trembling. The smallest one let out a weak, pitiful whimper. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. He grabbed a few towels from the closet and crouched down, gently rubbing them dry. They didn't resist, too exhausted to care. The stronger one, whom he decided to call Bruno for its resilience, let out a soft huff, curling its small body closer to the others. The second pup, Willow, nestled beside Bruno, its tiny frame pressing into his warmth. But the smallest one, still nameless, barely moved. Nathan touched its tiny paw, feeling the frailness of its bones beneath the thin skin. It was so small, so fragile. A part of him, one he had buried deep for years, stirred uncomfortably. He had lost someone small before, someone fragile. He shook the thought away. Rising to his feet, he moved to the kitchen and grabbed a bowl, filling it with warm milk. He soaked a cloth in it and carefully brought it to the smallest pup's mouth. At first, there was no response. Then, slowly, weakly, the tiny tongue flicked out, tasting the warmth. "That's it," Nathan murmured, coaxing it to drink. The storm outside raged on, rain hammering against the windows. But inside, there was warmth, small, fragile, but there. Nathan sat beside the couch, watching the puppies settle against each other. They were exhausted, but they were here, alive. He hadn't saved anyone in a long time. Nathan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know why he had done it. Maybe he was just tired of watching things die. Maybe, just maybe, saving them meant saving a part of himself, too. The cabin was silent, except for the faint sound of shallow, labored breathing. Nathan sat on the floor beside the couch, his back pressed against the worn-out armrest, watching the smallest pup struggle against the inevitable. The other two had nestled together, their small bodies rising and falling in steady rhythms, slowly warming under the thick towel he had wrapped around them. But the smallest one, the runt, barely moved. Nathan had seen that look before, a slow surrender to exhaustion, to pain, to death itself. The pup's tiny frame barely lifted with each breath, its ribs visible beneath the thin, damp fur. Its paws twitched now and then, but its energy was slipping. The storm outside had stolen too much from it, the warmth, the will to fight, and now it was fading. Nathan clenched his jaw. For years he had watched things slip through his fingers. He had lost cases, lost leads. He had lost his family, his sense of purpose, his place in the world. But he had never felt as helpless as he did now, watching something so small, so fragile, simply give up. Not this time. He stood abruptly, wrapping the pup in the towel, cradling its frail body against his chest as he strode toward the door. The wind outside still howled, but the storm was weakening, its fury spent. He didn't even bother grabbing a jacket. His only thought was the only person who could help. Dr. Olivia Barnes. Nathan had avoided her for years, not because of her, but because of what she reminded him of. She had been there, at the edges of his life, before it all fell apart, before the accident, before the loneliness. She had always been sharp, steady, the kind of person who never flinched under pressure. When they were younger, back when he was still a cop and she was building her career, she had been one of the few people who could challenge him without backing down. But then, after the crash that shattered his world, he had pushed her away, pushed everyone away. And she, knowing better than to fight against someone who didn't want to be saved, had walked away. Now he needed her. Nathan shoved open the truck door, settling the puppy carefully in the passenger seat, his large hands gripping the steering wheel as he started the engine. The road was still slick with rain, the occasional flash of lightning streaking across the sky, but he barely registered any of it. His focus was on the bundle of life and death beside him. The small veterinary clinic sat just outside of town, its warm glow standing in stark contrast against the dark, wet night. Olivia had moved her practice here years ago, choosing a quieter life away from the city's rush. It was just like her, practical, decisive, distant. Nathan pulled into the parking lot and barely killed the engine before throwing the door open. The clinic was closed at this hour, but that didn't stop him. He pounded on the glass door, his breath coming fast, his soaked shirt clinging to his frame. A moment later, a light flickered on inside. Olivia Barnes. The woman who answered the door hadn't changed much. Tall and slender, with sharp blue eyes that had always seemed to see straight through people, Olivia stood in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, stray strands framing her face. She was in her mid-40s now, but she had aged with the kind of effortless grace that came from never wasting energy on things that didn't matter. She had always been brilliant, but closed off, a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. When she spoke, it was always with purpose, no wasted words, no hesitation. And right now her expression was a mix of annoyance and concern. "Nathan?" Her voice was sharp, clipped. I need your help." His voice was rough, urgent. He didn't wait for her to refuse, didn't bother explaining. Instead, he pulled back the towel slightly, revealing the small, unmoving pup. Something in Olivia's face shifted. She didn't like Nathan Carter, or rather, she didn't like the way he had disappeared from his own life. But she was a doctor, first and foremost, and she had never turned her back on something in need. Without another word, she stepped aside. "Bring it in." Nathan didn't hesitate. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and warm hay, the kind of scent that came from a place where lives were both saved and lost. Olivia moved quickly, already in motion before Nathan could even take a breath. She led him into a small exam room, flipping on the bright overhead light that cast harsh shadows across the metal table. "Set it down," she ordered, already pulling on gloves. Nathan did as he was told. The pup looked even smaller under the harsh light, its body barely rising with each breath. Olivia leaned in, her fingers moving over its frail form, checking pulse points, feeling for heat, for infection, for hope. "This isn't good," she murmured, more to herself than to Nathan. "I know," Nathan muttered. Olivia glanced up at him, her blue eyes unreadable. "How long has it been like this?" "I found them maybe an hour ago, in the middle of the road. Someone dumped them in the storm." His voice was low, edged with something dark. "I think this one's the runt. It hasn't been moving much." Olivia didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she turned back to the pup, her movements quick and precise. "I'm putting it on oxygen," she said, grabbing a small mask and attaching it to a tube. "It's hypothermic, dehydrated, and probably has a respiratory infection. I need to warm it up first before I can even think about fluids." Nathan stayed silent as he watched her work. Olivia had always been like this, calm in a crisis, her mind working 3 steps ahead. He had seen her like this before, years ago, when she had saved a dying German shepherd that had been shot in the line of duty. She had saved lives before, and right now, he needed her to save this one. Time moved too slowly. Nathan stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching as Olivia moved with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. After what felt like forever, she finally exhaled, pulling off her gloves. "It's stable for now," she said. Nathan let out a slow breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "It's not out of the woods yet," Olivia warned, "but it has a chance." Nathan looked down at the tiny pup, now wrapped in a heat pad, its breathing still shallow, but steady. A chance. That was more than he had expected, more than he had dared to hope. The storm had begun to die down, but the cold still lingered in the air, leaving behind a world soaked and battered. Rainwater dripped from the edges of rooftops, pooling in potholes along the roads, and the scent of damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of the city streets. Nathan sat in his truck outside Olivia's clinic, staring through the windshield as the wipers cleared away the last remnants of the storm. The weakest puppy, Scout as Olivia had called him, was still inside, hooked up to oxygen, fighting for his life. Nathan had spent the night in the clinic, sitting in the corner with his arms crossed, watching the rise and fall of the tiny creature's chest, counting the breaths, refusing to leave until Olivia assured him the pup was stable. Now, as dawn broke and the sky remained an overcast grey, another storm brewed inside him. He needed answers. Someone had dumped those puppies in the middle of the road, left them to die. And whoever they were, Nathan was going to find them. He shifted in his seat, pulling out his old leather notebook from the glove compartment, the worn cover cracked from years of use. His fingers moved over the pages, flipping through scribbled notes from his time as a cop, old case files, pieces of information he had kept, not out of duty, but out of something darker. Nathan Carter had always been a man who needed to understand. He had never accepted loose ends, never let go of questions without answers. It was what had made him a damn good detective once. It was also what had destroyed him. Now the past was clawing its way back. The first clue. He started with the most logical place, the spot where he had found the puppies. The abandoned road just outside of town wasn't a place someone would pass through by accident. It was an intentional choice. A place far enough from prying eyes, yet still on a route that truckers and travelers sometimes took. Nathan parked his truck on the side of the muddy road, stepping out onto the damp ground. The scent of rain was still thick in the air, mingling with something else, something foul. He frowned, crouching down near a patch of flattened grass just beyond the pavement. A piece of plastic was half buried in the mud, torn and stained. A dog food bag. He picked it up, wiping away the dirt with his sleeve. It was generic, cheap, the kind sold in bulk at supply stores, nothing distinctive. But it hadn't been here long. The rain hadn't washed it away completely, which meant whoever dumped the puppies had been here recently. Nathan scanned the area, his sharp eyes catching another detail. Tire tracks, deep, heavy ones. A large vehicle, likely a van or a truck, had pulled up here not long ago. He pulled out his phone, snapping a few photos, mentally noting the pattern and width. Not a standard truck, something heavier. His gut tightened. He had seen tire marks like these before, years ago, back when he was investigating illegal dog-fighting rings. An ugly truth. Nathan drove back into town, his mind running through possible leads. He knew a few places where people with the wrong kind of money dealt in dogs. Puppy mills, illegal breeders, back-alley operations that treated animals like disposable goods. One name stood out. Carl Maddox. A man Nathan had encountered during a case years ago, tall, burly, with greasy dark hair and a permanent sneer. Carl ran a shady breeding business just outside of town. Officially, he sold purebred dogs. Unofficially, he was known to supply fighting dogs to underground circles. Nathan had arrested him once, back when he still wore a badge, but the man had slipped through the cracks of the justice system like so many others. Nathan's grip on the wheel tightened as he turned onto the long, dusty road leading to Maddox's so-called farm. It was a rundown property, a sagging barn in the distance, metal fencing around a yard where dogs were kept in cramped cages. The scent of wet fur and uncleaned kennels hit Nathan's nose the second he stepped out of the truck. A few pit bulls were chained up near the entrance, their ribs visible beneath their short coats. Their eyes flicked toward him, ears pulled back in wary distrust. Nathan clenched his jaw. The screen door creaked open, and Carl Maddox himself stepped out. Carl was in his 50s now, his once muscular frame beginning to soften with age, but the cruelty in his eyes remained sharp. He wore a stained flannel shirt, jeans that had seen better days, and heavy boots caked in mud. "Well, well," Carl drawled, crossing his arms over his chest. "Didn't think I'd be seeing you again, Carter. Thought you retired from playing hero." Nathan stepped forward, his stance solid. "You know why I'm here." Carl smirked. "Do I?" Nathan reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone, flipping to the photo of the tire tracks. "You recognize these?" Carl's smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it well. "Can't say I do." Nathan didn't blink. "Somebody dumped 3 golden retriever puppies on an abandoned road last night. One of them barely survived." He took a slow step closer, his voice lowering. "And I think you know exactly who did it." Carl's eyes flicked toward the barn, quick, almost imperceptible, but Nathan caught it. Guilt, or maybe something worse. "Look, Carter," Carl said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I ain't got time for your cop games. Maybe someone did dump some mutts out there, happens all the time. Not my problem." Nathan's fists clenched. He wanted to put the man through the nearest wall. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Here's the thing," Nathan said. "I don't give a damn about you, Maddox, but if I find out you or anyone working for you was involved in this, I will make it my problem. And trust me, you don't want that." Carl's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Nathan turned, heading back to his truck. He had enough for now, but this wasn't over. The storm within. Driving away, Nathan felt the weight of something else settling onto his chest, a connection he hadn't expected. Maddox had been tied to a bigger operation once. Years ago, when Nathan was still on the force, he had investigated an accident, a hit-and-run that had killed a woman and her daughter, his wife, his child. The case had gone cold. The suspect had vanished, and now, staring at Maddox's reaction, Nathan knew. Maddox had known the man responsible. The past wasn't just creeping up on him, it was colliding with the present. Nathan gripped the wheel, his mind racing. This wasn't just about puppies left in the rain. It was about something bigger, something darker. The storm outside had ended, but inside Nathan Carter, another one had just begun. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of Nathan's cabin, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The air inside was warmer than usual, filled with the scent of damp fur and faint traces of antiseptic from the last visit to Olivia's clinic. Nathan sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the 3 puppies curled up on the old flannel blanket he had laid out for them. For the first time since he had found them, they looked peaceful. Scout, the smallest of the 3, was still weak, his breathing shallow but steady. His fur was now clean, though patches of it were still thin where the infection had taken hold. Despite everything, there was a quiet determination in the little pup. He clung to life the way a drowning man clung to a lifeline. Bruno, the largest of the 3, was already showing signs of confidence. He had a stocky build, his golden coat beginning to regain its natural luster. He was the first to explore the cabin, sniffing at furniture, his tail wagging uncertainly. There was a toughness to him, a silent promise that he would always be the protector. Willow, the second pup, was the gentlest. Her frame was smaller than Bruno's, but more delicate, her fur softer, her eyes wide and thoughtful. She was the first to seek out Nathan's presence, curling near his feet whenever he sat down. When Bruno was too busy playing and Scout too weak to move, Willow would rest her head on Scout's side, as if standing guard. Nathan wasn't sure when the change had happened, when he had stopped seeing them as three helpless creatures and started seeing them as something more, something that mattered. He reached down, his fingers brushing through Willow's soft fur. She stirred, lifting her head sleepily before sighing and settling back down. Nathan felt a lump in his throat. He had never imagined himself as the kind of man who would take care of something again. His phone buzzed against the wooden coffee table, pulling him back to reality. It was Olivia. "Morning," she said when he answered, her voice steady but with that slight professional detachment she always carried. "How's Scout?" "Alive," Nathan muttered. "Still weak, but he's breathing." "That's good. Keep up with the antibiotics I gave you. And the warm milk. He needs to build his strength." "I know." A pause. Then, "And you?" Nathan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Same as yesterday." Another pause. Olivia knew better than to push. "Listen," she said finally. "I was looking into something last night after you left, about Carl Maddox." Nathan's spine stiffened. "Go on." "I did a little digging. Nothing official, but some of my contacts in the animal rescue network have been keeping tabs on certain people involved in illegal breeding. Maddox has been making big deliveries recently. Not just pit bulls and guard dogs, high-end breeds, expensive ones, golden retrievers, huskies, even some German shepherd litters." Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. He looked at the three puppies sleeping on the blanket. Golden retrievers. "They weren't meant to be abandoned," he muttered. "They were supposed to be sold." "Exactly." Silence stretched between them. Nathan could feel the weight pressing on his chest, the past threatening to suffocate him. Maddox wasn't just some low-level breeder. He was connected to something bigger, something darker. Nathan had spent years trying to bury the pain, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past. But now, the past had found him again. And this time, he had a choice. As the days passed, the puppies grew stronger. Bruno was the first to wag his tail when Nathan walked into the room, his ears perking up in recognition. Willow followed, pressing against his leg whenever he sat down, nuzzling into his side. Scout, though still weak, had begun to lift his head more, his eyes brighter than before. They were beginning to trust him. Nathan wasn't sure how to handle it. It had been years since something had relied on him. He had spent so long convinced that he had nothing left to give, that everything he touched either disappeared or ended in tragedy. And yet these three little creatures didn't seem to care about his past. They only cared that he was there. One evening, as Nathan sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line, Willow climbed onto his lap. It was hesitant at first. She paused at his feet, glancing up with wide, searching eyes, as if asking permission. Nathan didn't move. Slowly she crawled onto him, her small body settling against his chest. He could feel her warmth, the soft rise and fall of her breathing. Something inside him cracked. Nathan closed his eyes, his hand resting on her back. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he thought. But the past wasn't finished with him yet. Nathan knew he couldn't ignore what he had learned. Maddox wasn't just some careless criminal. He was a cog in a much larger machine, a machine that profited from suffering, that discarded anything too weak, too imperfect. Nathan had seen men like Maddox before, people who believed life had a price tag, people who had no problem leaving a woman and child on the side of the road after a hit and run. Nathan clenched his fists. He had spent too many years doing nothing. Maybe it was time to change that. The night air was thick with humidity, a lingering remnant of the storm that had ravaged the town days before. The damp scent of wet asphalt mixed with the faint rust of old metal, filling the air around the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Nathan sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. In the passenger seat, Olivia was silent, her sharp blue eyes locked on the darkened building ahead. The warehouse belonged to Victor Hale, the man running the illegal dog trade that had nearly killed the 3 golden retriever puppies Nathan had rescued. Victor had operated in the shadows for years, a ghost in the criminal world, careful enough to avoid major run-ins with the law, ruthless enough to eliminate anyone who got in his way. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick scar running from his left temple down to his jawline, Victor looked every bit the predator he was. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, as if every decision he made was nothing more than a business transaction. Nathan had seen men like Victor before, men who thrived on cruelty, who had no use for words like mercy or regret. Olivia adjusted her grip on the small handgun she had brought, her jaw tight. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Nathan exhaled slowly. "No," he admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Inside the truck, the 3 puppies, Scout, Bruno, and Willow, huddled together in a small crate Nathan had lined with blankets. Willow pressed her nose against the side, whimpering softly. She didn't like this place, neither did Nathan. The plan was simple: find proof, expose Victor, and get the authorities involved. But Nathan knew better than to expect things to go that smoothly. Victor had guards, men loyal not out of respect, but out of fear. Burly, tattooed enforcers who had spent their lives on the wrong side of the law, men who knew how to hurt people and didn't hesitate to do it. Nathan had seen them before, standing outside Victor's properties, watching with dead, expressionless eyes. Tonight Nathan wasn't here to just investigate. He was here to end this. He stepped out of the truck, signaling Olivia to stay close. The 2 of them moved through the darkness, their footsteps muffled against the damp ground. The warehouse loomed ahead, its massive steel doors slightly ajar. From inside, faint whimpers echoed, a sound that sent a fresh wave of fury through Nathan's chest. There were more dogs in there. He exchanged a look with Olivia. She nodded. Nathan pushed the door open, stepping inside. The stench hit him first. The overpowering smell of uncleaned kennels, wet fur, and fear. Metal cages lined the walls, each one crammed with dogs of different breeds, their eyes wide and pleading. Some were malnourished, their ribs pressing against their thin coats. Others lay motionless, either asleep or too weak to stand. Nathan's fists clenched. This wasn't just a business to Victor, it was a slaughterhouse. A voice echoed through the warehouse. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come here, Carter." Victor stepped out from the shadows, flanked by 2 of his men. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been afraid of losing. His lips curled into a smirk. Nathan stood his ground. "Shutting down your operation, Hale?" Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "That's so. You're alone, Carter. No badge, no backup. What makes you think you're walking out of here?" Nathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. From the corner of his eye, he saw Olivia moving, her fingers brushing against the phone in her pocket. She was already texting Sheriff Reed, sending their location, but Victor saw it too. Before Nathan could react, one of Victor's men lunged forward, a thick arm swinging toward Olivia. Nathan moved on instinct, his fist connected with the man's jaw, the sickening crunch of bone meeting bone echoing through the warehouse. The thug stumbled back, but Victor's second enforcer was already charging. Nathan ducked, twisting his body as he slammed his elbow into the man's ribs. Chaos erupted. Victor pulled a knife from his belt, lunging at Nathan. The blade nicked his shoulder, burning hot as it sliced through fabric and skin. Nathan gritted his teeth, twisting free just as Olivia fired her gun, a single shot that shattered the lock on one of the cages. The door flew open. A massive Rottweiler bolted out, snarling, its eyes burning with rage. The dog had been caged for too long, starved and beaten, and now it was free. Victor staggered back, cursing. "Get that thing under control!" The Rottweiler didn't listen. It lunged at Victor's nearest guard, its jaws snapping around the man's arm, dragging him to the ground. Dogs in the other cages began barking, howling, sensing the shift in the air. Olivia kept moving, unlocking more cages as Victor's men tried and failed to regain control. Nathan grabbed Victor by the collar, slamming him against the metal table in the center of the warehouse. "This is over," he growled. "You're done." Victor spat blood, smirking even as his men fell around him. "You think you're a hero, Carter? You think this ends tonight?" Nathan pulled back his fist, about to drive it into Victor's face, when a blur of golden fur shot past him. Scout, the smallest of the three puppies, the weakest one, leapt from the shadows, teeth bared, his tiny body moving with more courage than Nathan had ever seen. Victor barely had time to react before Scout latched onto his pant leg, growling with everything he had. It wasn't much, he was still just a pup, but it was enough. Enough to throw Victor off balance, enough to make him panic. Nathan used the moment. His fist crashed into Victor's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Blood dripped from his nose, his eyes dazed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff Reed had arrived. By the time the authorities stormed the warehouse, the fight was over. Victor was in cuffs, his men subdued. The dogs had been freed, Olivia tending to the worst of them as the rescue teams arrived. Nathan stood outside, leaning against his truck, watching the chaos settle. His shoulder throbbed from the knife wound, but he barely noticed. At his feet, Scout sat proudly, his tiny chest puffed up, his tail wagging. Nathan let out a tired chuckle, reaching down to scratch behind the pup's ears. "Brave little guy," he murmured. Scout wagged harder. Olivia stepped beside him, arms crossed. "You could have gotten yourself killed," she muttered. Nathan smirked. "Wouldn't be the first time." She sighed, shaking her head, but there was a small smile on her lips. As the rescue teams loaded the freed dogs into transport vans, as Victor was shoved into the back of a police car, as the night finally quieted, Nathan realized something. For the first time in a long time, he had won. The dawn light crept slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and muted gold. The air was crisp, fresh with the scent of damp earth after the night's rain, as if the world itself was cleansing away the filth of what had transpired. Nathan stood outside the sheriff's office, arms crossed over his chest, his shoulder still aching from the knife wound Victor had left him with. The bandage Olivia had wrapped around it earlier felt tight, but it was nothing compared to the weight that had lifted from his chest. Victor Hale was behind bars. The dogs had been rescued, and for the first time in years, Nathan Carter didn't feel like he was simply going through the motions of existing. He let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his beard. His truck was parked just a few feet away, where Scout, Bruno, and Willow were curled up on the passenger seat, sleeping soundly, exhausted from the chaos of the night before. The smallest one, Scout, the fighter, had tucked himself between the other two, his tiny frame rising and falling with steady breaths. Just days ago, they had been left to die in a storm. Now, they were safe. Sheriff Alan Reed stepped out of the station, his sturdy frame casting a shadow over the steps. He had the look of a man who had seen too much in his years of service. Broad shoulders, a square jaw lined with deep creases, short-cropped salt and pepper hair that had turned mostly grey before its time. He wore his uniform like an extension of himself, every crease ironed, every button polished, the kind of cop who still believed in what the badge stood for, even after years of seeing how little it sometimes meant. Reed stepped beside Nathan, exhaling as he pulled out a pack of gum from his pocket, offering a piece without a word. Nathan took it, unwrapping it slowly before slipping it between his teeth. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sleepy town begin to wake. "You did good," Reed finally said. Nathan scoffed, chewing absently. "Feels weird hearing that from you." Reed smirked, shaking his head. "Well, don't get used to it." He shifted his stance, glancing toward the truck where the puppies slept. "What are you going to do with them?" Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not sure yet." Reed nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "They trust you, you know." Nathan didn't reply. Reed watched him for a long moment before letting out a breath. "Victor's got no way out of this one. With the evidence we pulled from that warehouse, plus his men rolling over to save their own asses. He's done. He turned his gaze back to Nathan. But you already knew that, didn't you? Nathan shrugged. Just wanted to hear you say it. Reed chuckled. Smart ass. The door to the sheriff's office swung open again, and Olivia Barnes stepped out. She looked different in the daylight, softer somehow, less guarded, though there was still that sharpness in her blue eyes, the kind that had never dulled despite everything she had seen. She was wearing a dark green jacket over her usual button-down and jeans, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wisps of it curling around her face from the humidity. She walked up to them, hands in her pockets, glancing between the two men. Are you two bonding? Should I be worried? Reed snorted, tossing his gum wrapper into the trash can nearby. Not unless you're worried about Carter here actually listening to authority for once. Nathan rolled his eyes. Don't get your hopes up. Olivia smirked before turning her attention to the truck, where the three puppies stirred slightly. They're gonna need homes. Nathan felt something twist in his chest. He knew what she was getting at. He had told himself again and again, that once this was over, he would find someone else to take them. A shelter, a rescue, somewhere better than an old cabin with a man who barely had his own life together. But as he looked at them now, Willow's soft, trusting eyes, Bruno's protective stance even in sleep, Scout's tiny, fearless frame curled up between them, he knew. There was no one else. I'll figure it out, he muttered. Olivia arched a brow. That's not an answer. Nathan sighed. Yeah, well, I'm working on it. She studied him for a moment, and he hated that she could still read him so damn well. I think they already picked you, she said finally. Nathan didn't argue. Reed clapped a hand on Nathan's uninjured shoulder. You ever decide you want a job again? Let me know, he said, and Nathan couldn't tell if it was a joke or not. Maybe it wasn't. With that, the sheriff walked off, heading back inside. Olivia lingered, crossing her arms as she looked up at him. So, she said, what now? Nathan looked back at the truck, where Scout had finally woken up, stretching his tiny paws with a yawn before blinking up at him, tail wagging sleepily. Nathan exhaled. Guess I've got a few things to take care of. Olivia smiled, and it wasn't the small, polite one she usually wore. It was something warmer, something real. Yeah, she said, I guess you do. For the first time in a long time, Nathan Carter didn't feel like a man waiting for the past to catch up with him. For the first time in a long time, he had something to go home to. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine through the open windows of Nathan's cabin. The storm had passed, leaving the world fresh, renewed, as if it had washed away more than just the rain. Sunlight streamed through the trees, casting golden patches across the wooden floor, stretching towards the three small figures sprawled across a pile of blankets near the fireplace. Scout, the smallest and the bravest, lay curled into a tight ball, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He had grown stronger over the past few days, his fur no longer dull and matted, his eyes brighter, filled with a stubborn resilience that mirrored something in Nathan himself. Bruno, the strongest, had taken up his role as the protector, sitting close to his siblings, his broad frame already filling out as he gained weight. His ears twitched at the slightest sound, always alert, always watching. And then there was Willow, gentle and quiet, stretched out lazily on her back, one paw resting over her nose, as if trying to block out the morning light. She had always been the first to approach Nathan, the first to lean into his touch, as if she had known before he did that she belonged with him. Nathan sat in his usual spot by the kitchen table, his coffee untouched as he watched them, a slow exhale leaving his chest. He had never thought this would be his life, a cabin in the woods, 3 dogs asleep by the fire, a reason to wake up in the morning that wasn't just obligation. The thought was both unfamiliar and strangely peaceful. The sound of tires crunching over gravel outside pulled him from his thoughts. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. She always had a way of showing up when he least expected it, but when he needed it most. The door creaked open and Olivia Barnes stepped inside, a to-go cup of coffee in one hand, a small paper bag in the other. She looked the same yet different, like someone who had let go of something heavy but still carried the imprint of its weight. Her sharp blue eyes were softer now, her auburn hair loose instead of tightly pulled back, strands falling over her shoulders. She was dressed in jeans and a dark blue sweater, looking as if she had just come from town, but there was something about her stance that told Nathan she wasn't just here for a casual visit. "You look like a man who could use a real breakfast," she said, setting the bag on the table. Nathan smirked, leaning back in his chair. "What? The dried-out toast and black coffee diet isn't good enough for you? Not unless you're trying to kill yourself slowly." She pulled out a chair, settling into it without asking. That was just how she was, comfortable in places she had once belonged, even after time and distance had stretched between them. Nathan reached for the bag, opening it to find a couple of freshly baked croissants, still warm. He took a slow bite, his gaze flickering to Olivia as she sipped her coffee, her expression unreadable. She had been watching him closely these past few days, ever since Victor had been locked away, ever since the dust had settled, and Nathan had been left with the pieces of what remained. He knew her well enough to recognize that she was waiting for something. Finally she spoke. "So," she said, her fingers drumming lightly against her cup, "have you figured it out yet?" Nathan raised a brow. "Figured what out?" She gestured towards the dogs, all three still sleeping, blissfully unaware of the conversation happening around them. "That you're keeping them." Nathan exhaled, leaning back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the fireplace. He had spent the past few nights convincing himself he was just fostering them until he found someone better suited, someone who had the time, the space, the stability. But the truth had been sitting in his chest like a heavy stone, and now, with Olivia looking at him like she already knew the answer, there was no point in denying it. "They're mine," he admitted quietly. Olivia smiled, slow and knowing. "Took you long enough?" Nathan huffed, shaking his head. "Guess I'm not as stubborn as I used to be." "Oh, you're still plenty stubborn." She took another sip of coffee. "But maybe you're finally letting yourself live again." The words hit him harder than he expected, because she was right. For years he had been drifting, surviving but never really living. He had convinced himself that his life had ended the day he lost his wife and daughter, that whatever came after was just punishment for the things he couldn't change. But these dogs, Scout, Bruno, Willow, they had needed him, and without realizing it, he had needed them too. Olivia stood, brushing crumbs from her hands as she walked toward the door. "You coming?" Nathan blinked. "Coming where?" "For a walk," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The sun's out, the storm's gone. It's a good day to start over." Nathan hesitated. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because starting over had never been an option before. But then Willow stretched, letting out a long yawn before hopping off the blanket and trotting toward him, her tail wagging. Bruno followed, and after a moment, even Scout, small but determined, made his way over, his big brown eyes looking up at Nathan as if waiting for him to make a choice. Nathan let out a slow breath. Then he stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. "All right," he said, "let's go." The forest was alive with the sounds of morning. Birds flitted between the branches, the scent of fresh pine and damp earth lingering in the air. Nathan walked at a steady pace, his boots crunching over the gravel path as Olivia walked beside him, her hands tucked into her pockets. The three dogs moved ahead, their tails wagging, their noses sniffing at everything like it was the first time they had ever smelled the world. Bruno led the way, his large paws moving confidently, his ears perking at every sound. Willow stayed close to Nathan's side, glancing up at him every now and then, as if making sure he was still there. And Scout, small but fearless, darted between them, his tiny legs working twice as hard to keep up. Nathan watched them, a small smile pulling at the corner of his lips. For the first time in a long time, the weight in his chest wasn't suffocating. Olivia glanced at him. "So, what are their names?" Nathan took a moment before answering. "Bruno," he said, nodding toward the biggest one. "Willow." His gaze softened as he looked at the smallest. "And Scout?" Olivia hummed. "Scout, huh?" Nathan smirked. "He earned it." They walked in silence for a while, the kind that was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the forest waking up around them. When they reached a clearing, Nathan stopped, tilting his head up toward the sky. The sun was warm against his face, breaking through the trees, casting everything in golden light. The storm was gone, not just the one that had raged outside, but the one that had lived inside him for far too long. Nathan looked down at the 3 dogs sitting by his feet, then over at Olivia. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun, feeling alive. And then, with 3 dogs at his side and Olivia beside him, he stepped forward into the light.